Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how the first cells must have arisen from non-living material. This is in the notes that we were doing yesterday. It's right below the timeline of the Earth. So we already know that the cell theory states that all cells are formed from pre-existing cells, that Pasteur's experiments disproved the spontaneous generation of microbial life, but there has to have been a first cell that arose from non-living material. So how could life have arisen on Earth about 3.8 billion years ago? Keep in mind that the Earth was around for a good billion years before we think life arose. And the first cell that probably arose looked something like this. It was very simple, had a simple membrane surrounding some sort of self-replicating molecule like RNA. Even though we can't directly address how life arose, because nobody can go back in time, we can formulate and test hypotheses about natural processes that could account for the various intermediate steps. In the 1920s, Alexander Oparin and J.B.S. Haldane independently proposed nearly identical hypotheses for how life could have originated on Earth, and their hypothesis is now called the Oparin-Haldane hypothesis. Essentially, in the notes, it says, what is it? You can just write down that it's a hypothesis for how life originated on Earth. Essentially, their hypothesis had 4 steps, where you have inorganic molecules that turn into organic molecules that bind together to make large organic molecules, something that self-replicates and is then encapsulated in some sort of membrane. We're just going to talk about the first step today up here at the top. And at the bottom of your notes, you'll see those 4 boxes. We're just going to, again, be on the left box that says organic molecules. So the first step is the synthesis of simple organic molecules from inorganic compounds. So we need to define what inorganic and organic means. Organic means that it contains both carbon and hydrogen, whereas inorganic means that they may have a carbon or a hydrogen, but they're not in the same molecule. Mistakes that people commonly make with this is they think that anything that has carbon is organic. And again, it has to have both carbon and hydrogen. So something like CO2, which just has carbon, is not organic. Another mistake people make is they think that organic molecules are molecules that are necessary for life, like water or oxygen. But water doesn't have carbon, and so it's not considered organic. Inorganic molecules are usually small, they're often associated with non-living things, whereas organic molecules can be really large, and they're associated with life. Traditionally, you can see that each atom is a different color. Carbon is traditionally black, and oxygen is traditionally red, so you can see in these organic molecules that there's both a black and a red atom there. Some of the organic molecules that have to have formed in this first step are things like amino acids, nitrogenous bases, simple sugars, and fatty acids. And please pause me, as you're taking time to write these notes. On the next page, we're going to talk about the Miller-Urey experiment, which tested the first step, whether simple organic molecules can form from inorganic compounds. So Stanley Miller and Harold Urey determined that they can. Stanley Miller was a graduate student of Harold Urey's. These were taken at different times, which is why they look the same age, but he was actually quite younger than Urey. And Urey gave him the task of trying to create organic compounds from inorganic ones. So Stanley Miller, as a graduate student, created this apparatus here that has become really famous because it did simulate early Earth conditions and create organic compounds. This was the apparatus that he used, and you need to be able to tell me what these 4 parts of the apparatus are and do. Remember, this is trying to simulate early Earth, and early Earth was a hellish place. It was really hot, the atmosphere was a lot different, there was a lot of lightning, meteorites were constantly bombarding the Earth, there was a lot of geothermal activity like volcanoes, and so in trying to replicate this, he had a heat source, which was a Bunsen burner that was used to boil water, and this boiled water would evaporate and move into a larger flask up here, number 2. This boiled water, which you could think of just as the water vapor in the Earth's atmosphere, would combine with some early inorganic compounds. Though methane is a basic organic compound, but just some basic compounds here that we think were in the early Earth's atmosphere, like ammonia and hydrogen and methane. To simulate lightning and the energy that lightning contributes to these reactions, he had two electrodes and he fired sparks between them. This would create some sort of chemical reaction that would create a byproduct that, as it goes down this condenser, would cool this steam back into liquid water. This liquid water would carry with it any organic compounds that were made. The trap would trap the organic compounds, whereas the water would travel back into its first container. And what did they find? They found that they could create organic molecules from these inorganic things like ammonia and water. They were able to make amino acids, which was a really big deal back then because we had never been able to see amino acids spontaneously be created anywhere else. And so what this showed us was that organic molecules could have formed on what we call prebiotic Earth. Prebiotic meaning before life. There have been more recent experiments, and they're linked here if you want to read about them, that used conditions that we think even better reflected the conditions of early Earth. And they've produced a variety of other organic molecules, including lipids and RNA nucleotides, all of which we think are required to create the first cell. We're going to talk more about how lipids and RNA contribute to that on Thursday, Friday. There's also a lot of growing evidence that the first organic molecules could have been formed at these ocean hydrothermal vents or hot volcanic pools. I highly recommend you watch these videos. The top one goes over the actual apparatus, whereas the bottom one's more of a cartoon. But I think they really help explain what the apparatus did, and IB is really big on you understanding how this worked and what it produced. So I'm going to let you watch those on your own. I'm not going to record them. And next time we talk, we'll go over the second, third, and fourth steps: polymerization, self-replication, and packaging.